One of the things that Souls games are most known for is the fact that they don't do a great job of explaining their mechanics. At first glance, these games feel intuitive and easy to pick up. It's just so easy to fool yourself into thinking that you know how they work. And this is what leads you to play them for hundreds of hours and yet still be wrong on how some of the most basic mechanics work. And while usually players can get around this using trial and error, by testing these mechanics yourself, you're usually able to get a good idea of what's actually going on. However, Nightreign, being the roguelike game that it is, makes it so much harder for you to do that yourself. Because unless you're on PC using cheat engine, you'd have to do it in the middle of a 40-minute run. And the result? Tons of misinformation floating around. I've never seen a player base be so confused about how their own game works. And so today I'll try to debunk as much of this misinformation as I can. And hopefully I'll end up doing so without spreading a ton of misinformation myself, because that would be very funny. Though if I get anything wrong in this video, or something gets changed in a patch, I will post it in the pinned comment, so be sure to check that out. But without further ado, let's get to it. Number 1, let's talk about damage negation perks. There's a lot of confusion around them, especially with whether or not they stack. Now there are 3 passive ones that everyone agrees about. These are improved elemental damage negation, improved negation at full HP, and improved negation at low HP. And everyone agrees that all of these stack with each other and with themselves. And well, that is true. However, lots of people think that the active perks shown here don't stack. So let's clear this one up. First off, all of these do stack with each other under all circumstances. However, they only stack with different versions of themselves. So, if I pick up 2 weapons and they both have improved damage negation with successive attacks by 48%, then they don't stack. But if one has 48% and the other has 60% or any other different value, then they do stack. And this just applies to all other active damage negation perks. One way to know whether buffs stack or not is to just look at the UI under your stamina bar. These icons are not just lying to you. Grief passives work in a similar way in that they only stack with themselves if you have 2 different versions of them. So you can stack Duchess Grief 1 with Duchess Grief 1. You'd have to stack Duchess Grief 1 with Duchess Grief 2, or another character's grief. Number 2, improved affinity damage. Unfortunately, I'm guilty of spreading this around myself, because I really did believe it. Because I and many others thought that this only applies to elemental damage dealt by your melee weapons. And this is just not true. This will apply to any elemental damage that you deal, period, no matter what the source is, including spells. This has become easier to test because there are now debuff night relics that give you that effect. I personally missed out on a lot of damage as Recluse because I just never picked this up. So, learn from my mistakes. Number 3, you lose a level when you die. Somehow, I still see this being shared around. Some people think that when you die, you permanently lose a level. But what actually happens is that the runes that you need to get that level back are added to the runes that you drop. And so getting them back will let you level up again. Number 4, Steelguard doesn't improve elemental damage negation. I don't know where this comes from, but I've seen this shared around a lot. Basically, a lot of people think that Guardian's passive only reduces the amount of stamina damage that you take from attacks. But the reality is, well, no. It also reduces the amount of elemental damage that you take by around 25% or so, which is not a huge amount, but knowing this can be very helpful. Number 5, two-handed passives work with bows. This is another one that I unfortunately spread around myself. It's just not true. The bonus never applies even if you two-hand your bow. Another thing people get wrong about two-handing is that it doesn't give you the 50% strength bonus that it used to give you in older Souls titles. Because bows do have some strength scaling, and yet their damage doesn't change whether you two-hand them or not. The only reason two-handing a melee weapon gives you slightly more damage is because the two-handed movesets have higher motion values. Number 6 and 7. Let's talk about Ironeye's mark. I've seen players not use their mark on already marked enemies, thinking that doing so would reset how much damage you have to deal to them for the mark to explode. How this actually works though, is that using your mark on a marked enemy will only extend the duration of the existing mark, so using it is always beneficial. Another one I keep hearing is that status proc damage doesn't count towards breaking the mark. And well, this one's actually turned out to be true. I want you to join my Discord server. You know, being a part of a community while it's still small is very fun in my opinion. And I want you to come ruin it by joining, so that you can enjoy it while making it worse for those who come after. Just like the boomers did in America. We have an LFG channel where you can play Nightreign with me and other members of this community. There's no reason for you not to join. Link in the description below. Number 8 and 9. Raider's Ultimate. First myth is that some people reasonably think that you have to stay within the aura of the ultimate for the buff to apply to you. But you actually only need to touch the aura once for the buff to be applied to your character. And as Raider, you already start on the top of the totem. So the buff will be applied automatically to you and will stay on no matter how far you get away from the totem. The other myth is that some people think that the totem increases all damage that you deal. And while this is a reasonable assumption, it doesn't. It only affects melee weapons and their weapon arts, and it just does not affect spells. I was hoping that this would get changed in the DLC patch, but it did not. Number 10, let's talk about stats. Earlier in the game's lifecycle, the stats for all the Nightfarers got data mined. And two things stood out for most people. First was the fact that Duchess only had one more point in intelligence than she does in dexterity, despite the stat sheet implying that she does have an A in the intelligence and a B in dexterity, which led a lot of people to think that she isn't actually that much better with intelligence than she is with dexterity, and that the developers are just kind of lying to us. What these people get wrong is that the scaling of these stats were completely differently. So comparing them in this way makes no sense in the first place. It's apples to oranges basically. Like, if they were both equal in number or grade, that wouldn't mean that they give you the same DPS, for example. Like, sorcery will always give you more DPS, but it's limited by your FP bar, and melee will let you do things that you can't do with sorceries, like applying status effects or blocking multi-hit buffs. And so there are just so many things to consider, so again, apples to oranges. To really know how good anything is, we compare it to what is best. So let's compare her to the best characters for these stats. On average, Duchess deals around 92% as much damage with sorceries as Recluse, but only 80% as much damage with dex weapons as Executor, and these trends are consistent no matter what level you are or the rarity of your weapon. So the letters actually make a lot of sense here. Another character that stood out to people was Executor, who had more than double the amount of arcane as anyone else. What people seem to not realize when they keep repeating this is that this doesn't mean that he inflicts status effects twice as fast as other characters, because these stats are not like health or stamina. They're not starting from scratch. They're determining how much extra stuff that you get, meaning that they're increasing off of a base level that everyone has. And so having double arcane doesn't mean that you inflict double status, it just means that you get double the increase over the base level. The difference is significant, but it's not as big as the number might imply. Number 11, let's talk about Recluse's cocktails. First off, unlike what you might assume at first, they count as sorceries. And that means that they're affected by things like improved sorcery damage and extended spell duration. They don't belong to any spell schools though, so any relic effects that boost these don't affect them. Another thing that I really wanted to clear up is something to do with the Fire Breath cocktail. At first, I thought this was a melee range spell, but it turns out that this actually has very decent range and no damage fall off, and so it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was. Number 12, Restage. How Restage works is that every instance of damage can be restaged or reprised only once. And so unlike what some people might think, you can't reprise your own restage, or vice versa. And you can't do that to another Duchess restage or reprise. And by the way, when I say reprise, I'm referring to the relic effect that activates the restage-like ability when you land the final hit of a dagger combo. The weirdness with restage does not stop there, of course. Because here's something that I only recently found out. When an attack is in the process of being reprised or restaged and you activate the other ability, it doesn't just not work. Instead, it overrides the ability that you activated first. So for example, if you accidentally reprise a very high damaging attack while restage is available, you can just hit restage immediately after. And if you do so before the attack is reprised, then you'll restage it instead, and get more damage overall. There is also a surprising amount of myths floating around about which attacks can or cannot be restaged. So let me go over some of those. You can't restage status procs. Myth. You can't restage reposts. Well, it seems like the first part of the repost can never be restaged, no matter how early or late you start the ability. But the second part of the repost can be restaged. So this one is partially true, but it is wrong in every way that matters, because the second part of the repost does much more damage. You can't restage Ironeye marks. That one seems to be true, actually. Well, that's all that I had to say. If I got anything wrong, or if you know about any commonly shared pieces of misinformation, please let me know in the comments below. The DLC is already out by the time that you're watching this, and I'm probably playing it right now. So see you in the next video, if that ever happens anyway.